Somewhere under the grey London sky, on the most famous stretch of grass in tennis, a dream that once looked impossible came to an end. But if you think Alexandra Eala walked away from Wimbledon defeated, then you completely missed what just happened over the last 2 weeks at the All England Club. Because this was never supposed to happen. Not like this. Not this fast. Not from a 21-year-old Filipino player who, only a year ago, was still being introduced to casual tennis fans as a promising prospect with potential rather than a genuine threat to the biggest names in the sport. And yet, on center court at Wimbledon 2026, Alexandra Eala stood toe-to-toe with one of the best grass court players in the world and nearly pushed herself into the quarterfinals of a Grand Slam. Jasmine Paolini eventually stopped the run, defeating Eala 6-4, 4-6, 6-3 in a fourth-round battle that lasted far longer emotionally than the scoreline suggests. But what matters now is not simply who won the match. What matters is what the tournament revealed. Because Wimbledon 2026 changed Alexandra Eala forever. And honestly, it may have changed tennis in the Philippines forever too. The final scoreboard looked straightforward on paper. Paolini won in 3 sets. Experience prevailed. The higher-ranked player survived. End of story. Except that was not the real story at all. The real story was how dangerously close Eala came to winning it. The real story was how a player competing in the second week of Wimbledon for the very first time looked completely comfortable on the biggest stage in the sport. The real story was that thousands of fans inside center court genuinely believed she was going to do it again. Just 48 hours earlier, Alexandra Eala had produced the biggest shock of the entire tournament by defeating defending Wimbledon champion Iga Swiatek in straight sets. Not sneaking past her. Not surviving a collapse. Beating her. Outplaying her. Controlling her. And doing it on center court with the entire tennis world watching in disbelief. That victory changed everything. Before Wimbledon started, Eala was still being discussed as an exciting young talent with momentum. After the Swiatek match, she stopped being treated like a future possibility and started being treated like a present danger. You could feel the shift immediately. The crowds became louder. The attention became global. Every sports page suddenly wanted her story. Every highlight package led with her name. And somewhere deep inside the tournament grounds, the other players noticed too. Because when you beat the defending champion at Wimbledon, nobody overlooks you anymore. But what made the Swiatek win even more extraordinary was the way Eala played. She looked fearless. Not reckless. Fearless. There is a difference. Young players sometimes swing wildly because they have nothing to lose. That is not what Eala did. She played with clarity. With purpose. With tactical intelligence that looked years ahead of her age. She attacked short balls early. She used her left-handed angles beautifully. She redirected pace instead of panicking under it. And perhaps most importantly, she never looked emotionally overwhelmed by the moment. That is incredibly rare. Especially on center court. Especially against a 6-time Grand Slam champion. Especially for someone from a country that has almost no history of producing deep Grand Slam singles runs. Yet there she was, smiling between points, absorbing the atmosphere instead of shrinking beneath it. And that is why the loss to Jasmine Paolini hurts the way it does. Because she was close enough for everyone to start imagining the impossible. The match itself was brutally tight from the very beginning. Paolini took the opening set 6-4, but even that score hides how competitive the tennis really was. Long rallies. Tight service games. Momentum swings every few minutes. Neither player giving an inch. Paolini's experience on grass mattered immediately. This is a player who reached the Wimbledon final in 2024. She understands how to manage nerves on center court. She knows when to slow matches down, when to raise the tempo, when to attack second serves, when to extend rallies. That knowledge showed. But Eala matched her. Every time Paolini looked ready to pull away, Eala dragged herself back into the contest. And then came the second set. This was the moment where inexperienced players usually disappear. A first-time Wimbledon fourth-round player loses a close opening set on center court and starts pressing too hard. The errors come. The emotions take over. Except Eala did the exact opposite. She became calmer, more aggressive, more composed. Her returning improved dramatically. She began stepping inside the baseline and taking Paulini's serve earlier. Her forehand started finding sharper angles. The left-handed patterns that troubled Swiatek suddenly started bothering Paulini too. And little by little, the crowd sensed it. Another upset was possible. Another miracle was unfolding. Eala took the second set 6-4, and suddenly the entire stadium changed emotionally. You could hear it in the noise between points. You could feel it in the tension. Because this was no longer just a promising young player having a good tournament. This was a player standing one set away from becoming the first Filipino in history to reach a Grand Slam quarterfinal. That pressure would crush most people. But Alexandra Eala kept fighting. The third set became a war of discipline. Paulini broke early and immediately understood the importance of protecting the lead. Her experience became crucial there. She stopped giving Eala rhythm, mixed up heights, changed speeds, extended rallies when necessary and shortened them when opportunities appeared. That is veteran grass court tennis. And still Eala kept pushing. Every game felt alive. Every deuce felt enormous. Every point carried the weight of history. But eventually, the margins turned against her. Paulini closed it out 6-3 in the third. And for a few seconds after the final point, center court sat in that strange emotional silence that only exists when fans realize they just witnessed something special ending before they were ready for it to end. Because this run mattered far beyond rankings or statistics. This was cultural. This was historic. This was transformational. Alexandra Eala did not simply make the fourth round of Wimbledon. She changed what young Filipino athletes now believe is possible in tennis. Think about where this journey started. A girl from Quezon City training after school with her grandfather and brother. Ruffled socks, light-up shoes, long practice sessions. A country where tennis has always existed in the shadow of basketball and boxing. And now that same girl walked into Wimbledon and beat the defending champion on center court. That sentence still sounds unreal. But it happened. And the numbers from this run are astonishing when you lay them out properly. She entered Wimbledon as the 29th seed. She had never gone beyond the second round of a Grand Slam before this season. She then proceeded to win 4 matches on grass at the biggest tournament in the world. She defeated Maya Joint, the player who had just beaten Serena Williams. She dismantled IGA Swiatek in straight sets. And she pushed a former Wimbledon finalist to 3 sets in the 4th round. That is not a lucky draw. That is not a fluke run. That is elite-level tennis. And what makes this even more exciting is how naturally her game now translates to grass. A year ago, people still wondered whether grass would ever become one of her best surfaces. Now the answer looks obvious. Her left-handed patterns are incredibly dangerous on low-bouncing courts. Her aggressive return positioning disrupts servers. Her flat backhand penetrates through grass beautifully. And her ability to redirect pace early gives opponents almost no time to settle. Even more importantly, she has started learning how to manage points emotionally instead of just physically. That is the true sign of growth. The best players in the world are not simply talented hitters. They are emotional problem solvers. They know how to survive pressure. This Wimbledon run proved Alexandra Eala is beginning to understand that level of tennis. And now the rankings will reflect it too. When Wimbledon began, she was ranked outside the top 25. When it ends, she will likely enter the top 20 for the first time in her career. At 21 years old. That matters enormously. Because now she is no longer entering tournaments as a dangerous outsider. Now she enters them as a genuine seeded threat. The sport treats you differently at that point. The draws change. The expectations change. The respect changes. And perhaps the most important thing of all is this. The belief changes. You could see it in her body language throughout Wimbledon. She no longer looks surprised to belong on these courts. That psychological shift is massive. Young players often spend years asking themselves whether they truly belong among the elite. Eala no longer has to ask that question. She already proved it. And the reaction from the Philippines shows how deeply this run resonated. Watch parties filled arenas. Fans gathered overnight for tickets. Social media exploded after the Swiatek victory. Children who had never cared about tennis suddenly knew exactly who Alexandra Eala was. That kind of connection cannot be manufactured. It happens only when an athlete represents something larger than sport itself. And Eala does. She represents possibility. She represents a country entering conversations it was never previously included in. She represents the idea that tennis greatness does not have to come from traditional powerhouses anymore. That matters globally, especially in Asia, especially for young girls watching this tournament from countries that rarely see themselves represented at the highest levels of tennis. And perhaps that is why this loss does not feel like an ending. It feels like an introduction. Because once the emotions settle, the truth becomes obvious. Alexandra Eala is not leaving Wimbledon as a player who failed to reach the quarterfinals. She is leaving Wimbledon as one of the breakout stars of the entire season. And the terrifying part for the rest of the tour is that she is still improving. She is still learning how to manage big moments, still building physical strength, still understanding grass court movement, still developing point construction against elite defenders, still growing into her own power. That should concern everyone above her in the rankings. Because if this is already the level she can produce at 21 years old, then what happens 2 years from now? What happens when the experience catches up to the talent? What happens when she returns to Wimbledon already knowing she can beat anyone on center court? That is the future now facing the WTA. And somewhere inside the locker room, the top players absolutely understand it. The grass season of 2026 belonged to Alexandra Eala. Not because she won Wimbledon, but because she arrived. Really arrived. The Birmingham title announced her momentum. The Berlin wins over Elena Rybakina and Elina Svitolina confirmed her legitimacy. The Wimbledon run made the entire sport pay attention. And now the hardcourt season is next. The US Open is coming. The same tournament where she won junior glory years ago now waits for her again as a completely different player. Not a hopeful prospect. Not a feel-good underdog. A genuine contender. That is what Wimbledon changed. And honestly, that may be the most important part of this entire story. Alexandra Eala lost in the 4th round. But tennis did not watch someone fall short. Tennis watched someone arrive sooner than expected. The All England Club has seen legends walk its lawns for more than a century. Champions, icons, history makers. And for 2 unforgettable weeks in 2026, a 21-year-old from the Philippines forced herself into that conversation. Not politely, not quietly, but loudly enough that the entire sport had no choice but to notice. That is why this tournament will be remembered. And that is why Alexandra Eala should leave Wimbledon with her head held incredibly high. Because this is not the end of her story. It feels much more like the beginning.